Oh, breaking news. The Bank of Canada has made another significant rate cut. The central bank slashed its key policy rate by 50 basis points, bringing it to 3.25%. It's the fifth straight cut after years of increases. Now, the bank indicated that further cuts would be more gradual, shifting from its previous messaging that continuous easing was needed to support economic growth. Well, for more on what today's decision means for borrowers, we're joined live by financial advisor Alan Small. Always great to have you in on these rate announcements day. Some people were possibly predicting a quarter point, but in light of some economic data, it looks as though we have a much bigger cut. Were you surprised at all by that?
I don't think anybody was surprised. I think, in my opinion, I was hoping for just 25 basis points.
Why?
Because to me, I think when you go 50 basis points, that tells me that our economy is possibly weaker than we all anticipate. That's number one. Number two, look what it's doing to our dollar. Our dollar has weakened significantly. If the Fed does not cut rates next week, then you could probably see our dollar fall below 70 cents. Now, great for those that are exporting to the United States. They can buy more of our goods cheaper. But those that are importing goods, importing parts, for cars and many other things in the manufacturing sector, those things cost a lot more money. Could that then spur on inflation if it remains, the dollar remains this low? That is quite possible. So I think the Bank of Canada has to be very careful. On one side, they're balancing a 6.8% unemployment rate, which is definitely a lot higher than it was.
Up from 6.5.
Right. It's a lot higher than it's been for quite some time. We're seeing GDP growth, basically non-growth, just above 1% on a per capita basis, the lowest out of all G7 nations. But on the other side, you're looking at our dollar weakening significantly versus the U.S. dollar, and with that, the effects of that on our economy. So a lot of things to balance for Tiff Macklem and the Bank of Canada.
And this is coming ahead of an economic update that's coming up on Monday by the federal finance minister. And from all signs of what we're seeing is that this $40 billion deficit, the target that she's set, is not going to be reached. According to the Parliamentary Budgetary Office, we could be seeing a $46 billion deficit. So how does that play into this decision, and what does this spell for the economy?
It makes it a lot more difficult for the Bank of Canada because as we rack up more debt, it affects our dollar, it affects our interest rates. It makes it a lot more difficult for a Bank of Canada to set policy. And so when we're spending more money to stimulate, when the Bank of Canada is cutting rates to stimulate, and we're not really seeing much stimulation following through to the economy, how much do they have to cut? How much do they have to spend before we start to see GDP growing more than just 1%? That is the question, I think, in the minds of all of us.
And taking all that in, the government just announced that they wanted to dole out some checks to Canadians, but at the same time, take away the GST on a little bit of a holiday break at a time when our country's finances are in this rough shape. Do you think, in your personal opinion, is now the time to start handing out money to Canadians?
In my opinion, I think overall what you want to do is something that is more longer lasting. Sending out checks in April or cutting GST for a 2-month period, that might have some short-term effects on our economy, maybe boost it a little bit. But by the summer, everything's going to get back to where it is. And so what I would like to see is more longer-lasting initiatives, such as maybe cutting income tax. Down in the U.S., I guess with the president-elect taking office in January, looking to cut taxes down in the U.S., are we not going to have to cut taxes up here just to keep, things in perspective with our neighbors to the south, to keep competitive with our neighbors to the south? I think that's going to be important.
Oh, I'm glad you went in that direction because today we've got the Prime Minister is going to be speaking with premiers about the threat of the tariffs from President-elect Donald Trump. You talked about the fact that our dollar is slowly shrinking. That's good for Americans who are buying Canadian products. But on the flip side, with these tariffs potentially looming, the dollar is shrinking. What does that mean for a lot of Canadian businesses? Just to circle back and for especially a small business at a time when they're struggling right now.
Again, it's all about costs, right? Costs are rising. If the United States is putting tariffs on all things that we're shipping to the United States, that obviously raises the cost of those goods. But again, at the same time, does that kind of balance off with a weaker dollar so they could buy more, but maybe at a higher price? We're going to have to see how it all plays out. And once again, makes the job for Tiff Macklem and the Bank of Canada a lot more difficult.
And I have to wrap up quickly. Do you think this is going to further stimulate possibly the real estate estate market, people getting back into to get some cheaper borrowing costs?
Most definitely. We're already seeing housing market starting to heat up in the Toronto area. So I do think spring season will be a very active one.
Financial advisor Alan Small, always great to chat.
Thank you.
See you soon.